Okay, welcome back everyone. It is 5/21 of 2015. We're going to pick up on the next lesson by Lacocque on the covenant of the law. And we had a pretty good lesson last time, so it's he's getting increasingly into the content. It's becoming a little bit deeper each time. This time he wants to discuss the modalities of a covenant and the way that it evolves. So from a commandment to entering into the realm of a rabbinic interpretation, and then through rabbinic interpretation it moves on to a transfiguration or a prefiguration of something greater than itself, something that has pointed beyond itself that the rabbinic interpretation brought out. So it's a pretty key point because it's going to really bring out how we can start thinking as members of the Jewish membership and using a Hebrew Bible, how the rabbinic interpretive teachings never evacuate the Hebrew Bible. They're always a part of the Hebrew Bible. And so we'll take a look at this. It's going to be quite a bit different than a Western perspective. So it'd be nice to take up this Jewish perspective through the rabbinic interpretation and rabbinic truth. We begin with the first moment of the prohibition of command. Commands are inscriptions prior to the taking up of the concept of human weakness by the rabbinic interpretation. And justice still needs to pass through a three-point conceptual reduction or abbreviation process to unveil its inner truth. So it begins as an initial command concept. It'll pass through narrative signification. Rabbinic interpretation is signification. It's kind of a sign model narrative that points beyond itself. And then it'll move into the third moment of the teleology of an abbreviated category, a category that functions within the telos of that incarnate Kephale wisdom that we talked about under the doctrine of creation. So at this point, commands are in need of amplification. The conceptual command needs to be infused with the rabbinic poetical amplification in order to unveil its hidden truth. So a command needs to have its bearing upon the human community broadened. It needs to be broadened toward universality. And it anticipates this broadening of bearing through the mediation of love, which is going to be, in the case of the rabbinic interpretation, that love is going to be wisdom. It's going to be ethical love. It's going to be wisdom, or the Kephale wisdom, which is going to be an alignment type wisdom that will find the alignment of truth within the command. Within the conceptual, the rabbinic interpretation is going to find the sign-like alignment that is internal, and it will unveil, rabbinic interpretation will unveil that sign-like alignment of truth, that Kephale type alignment. Because at the level of command, it just is a prohibitive marked out boundary, and only a marked out boundary. It doesn't really have a positive thrust. It just has kind of the restrictive mode of boundary. So let's take a look at the amplification through narrative, which is a rabbinic narrative. It's a stimulus mode. Command transitions to a stimulus toward ethical action. We're going to enter the ethical realm this way. And it is, like I said before, the mediation of wisdom. It's through the mediation of the rabbinic wisdom narrative, that unveiling of the alignment type Kephale wisdom. So it'll be a sign model. It's going to be a signpost narrative of a pointing alignment that is unveiled. And so this is the reflexive moment. It is the self-reflexive moment within the rabbinic school and the rabbinic interpretive teaching, it constitutes the reflexive moment for the law to make it transition out of command and to unveil the internal nature of truth. So this second moment is a context. It's a textual context, and it becomes the ground of law. It becomes the rabbinic ground of the law. Now here we get into a beautiful teaching, and this is, to me, the most important part of this lesson, and that's that Lacocque takes up the binding of Isaac by his father and the sacrifice on the altar. He takes the Isaac example of the example he wants to use to show how this command transitions through narrative, then moves on to transcendence. And it's a beautiful example because it's such a harsh, brutal example to take up. So he doesn't back off here. He picks a very, very difficult example, the Isaac binding and sacrifice. And so when we look at that example, the command is in Exodus 20:13 that simply says it's the commandment, thou shalt not kill. But then in Genesis 22, we have Abraham binding Isaac, putting him on the altar, and he's going to kill Isaac, sacrifice Isaac. So Lacocque says, let's take a look at this example and the aspects of this example. And we do so, we realize that we're anticipating the resolution of this conflict by taking up the telos of that incarnate Kephale wisdom. That's going to be our answer, which was kind of answered by Paul in Galatians 3:17 when he reflected back and looked at this. He kind of looked at the span of years between the commandment and the act of faith by Abraham. He actually looked at that, and he looked at that span of years in Galatians 3:17. So we're going to anticipate Galatians 3:17, where faith will transcend law. But we're going to look at the rabbinic teaching next. So here's the key. We're going to take a look at this example within this second moment of rabbinic teaching. So Lacocque says there's a 5-point rabbinic faith paradigm that is drawn from the narrative in Genesis 22. It says that the firstborn belongs to God. Number 2, the firstborn is interpreted as a child of death. And so just simply the life and the birth of a firstborn is a type of a figurative or metaphorical resurrection, because the firstborn is the child of death, who is born as a resurrected spiritual living being. So Genesis 22:17 becomes the blessing part of the narrative, and it becomes a prefigurement of the resurrection over death. It actually becomes a metaphorical prefigurement of resurrection. So then Galatians 3:17, which references that 430-year span between the command and this narrative event in Genesis 22, essentially points out, Paul says, that this was a promise event of redemption. It was a prefigurement of promise event of redemption and soteria, salvation. So it's all about, again, the Kephale alignment, the aligning wisdom that is unveiled through the rabbinic interpretation. And so Lacocque quotes another Jewish scholar, and he says, think of it as going from command to law with paragraphs. Law with paragraphs of interpretation. Law with Kephale alignment included with it. And a big plus is that Psalm 78 and Psalm 105 both point to the fact that the firstborn are always kind of a representative of the head of the body of a nation. They're kind of like the signifying head of the body of a populace. And so Isaac is metaphorically the head of the promised nation of Abraham's seed, a prefigurement of a soteria salvation Christ. And so rabbinic interpretation, you can see how it really takes that initial command and expands it through love and faith to a much more profound understanding. And Isaac is the perfect example of that. And so that takes us to the third important moment of looking at that prefigurement. Now, under the prefigurement, we are transitioning to universality, from the prohibitive through the ethical to the communal universality. And we do that through the filter of human fragility. We've passed through that rabbinic interpretation of the feasibility of truth, and that is a rabbinic teaching that takes up the concept of human weakness and fragility. But it is all telos oriented. The ethical becomes suspended in favor of that telos of the covenant, which we learned in the doctrine of creation, included in an incarnate Kephale wisdom alignment. A Kephale wisdom alignment was incarnated at the very day of creation. So transcendence prevails. The limit of the law, the boundary of the law and command, becomes amplified through narrative, and now it reaches transcendence. And we have to be careful here, because Lacocque says ethics can slip into the sin of becoming only measured, overly measured interpretation, which Christ opposed. Lacocque says that in the New Testament examples of Christ opposing the Pharisee rabbis, it was always the Pharisee rabbi who was overly measuring the rigidity of the law and not giving it the broader application through love, agape love. In the New Testament, it's agape love that forms the context. In this Old Testament narrative, the Jewish Bible, it's the Kephale wisdom that provides that context, the Kephale wisdom of alignment. So the true transcendence takes up that Kephale alignment wisdom that the Lord incarnated at the moment of creation through the Lord's creative act of love. And that way the Isaac binding is a prefigurement of justification by faith. We can look at that narrative in Genesis 22 and see a prefigurement of justification by faith, which is later picked up by Paul in his letter to the Galatians, where he specifically references that gap of years between that command and that narrative. So extremely detailed, in-depth look at the modalities of the covenant and the example of Isaac. That'll wrap us up through page 101.